Do we care about our local athletes? Welcome to the General Podcast. I'm your host, Eunice.
And I'm your host, JH.
Welcome back. It's been a while since we have been here, but here we are today, and we have a very, very special guest with us today, and he's none other than Hazim! Woo!
Hey, hello.
All right, Hazim, so maybe you can share a quick self-intro of yourself.
Oh yeah, so basically I'm Hazim.
Hazim.
I used to work with Eunice and JH.
Yeah.
We are all former colleagues here. Ooh. When I was working under Eunice, right?
Ooh. Oh, spicy.
My boss.
No, don't say that. Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah, okay. So I taught GP, General Paper. I also teach English O-levels, upper lower sec as well. But interestingly enough, what I studied, right, more specifically in university, was accountancy. Yeah, but after going through my 3 years at NTU, I decided that, okay, teaching English is something that I'm comfortable with doing and I want to pursue for basically the rest of my life.
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's a big commitment right
Yeah,
there.
Yeah.
big commitment, right? We'll see. So far, so good.
Good. So thanks for joining us on the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we are inviting him on board because he is a really, really staunch supporter of the arts as well as sports.
I would say, we're not staunch. I mean, I am interested in the arts. I'm interested in sports.
All right. So
yeah.
maybe you can dish out a few little known facts about yourself in relation to sports later on. Let's talk about what the topic is at hand today. So to what extent is sporting achievement given adequate recognition in your society? So speaking about the latest event, right, that has happened this year, SEA Games, right, Southeast Asia Games has just concluded not too long ago. So it's about late May. So it was in Hanoi, Vietnam. And during this period of time, of course, our local athletes, right, they competed in many, many events. But before that, there was actually a little bit of a controversy. Perhaps some of you may be aware. So Soh Rui Yong is actually a very, very well-known marathoner. And he was excluded from the SEA Games lineup. And the reason why he was excluded by SNOC, Singapore National Olympic Council, was that he actually fell short. So his conduct was falling short in that sense, right? And if you think about it, what is the factor, okay, that resulted to him falling short is, I wouldn't say it's quite recent, but it happened quite long ago. And it actually spanned over a few years, right? Which was a defamation suit against him.
I think he set up the suit, right?
He
He said something about his fellow competitor,
yes,
which caused that competitor, I believe is Ashley Liu, right?
yes, correct.
Right, to basically take him to court, right?
Correct. Based on articles, okay, so the timeline was that it was during the 2015 SEA Games, I believe. It was an event where basically the marathoners had to make a U-turn in order to complete the run, okay, and the athletes, they actually, inclusive of Soh, they exceeded the U-turn, right? So Liu actually did make the U-turn, and when he realized that he was ahead of his fellow competitors, that's when he slowed down. According to witnesses, he did slow down and waited for the rest to catch up before resuming his run, right? So he was actually awarded the sportsmanship award, and after that, Soh actually went on to say that it's fake, it's not real, that he actually slowed down. So he received a lawyer letter, right? But what happened next was that he didn't stop, he didn't cease and desist, and that's why he was charged with the defamation suit. That was one of the reasons, I would say, right, that he actually got excluded from the lineup. So what do you think about this whole situation?
This situation of being excluded from like a regional competition just because of your own personal conduct, right?
Yeah.
I do think that it's perfectly justified from SNOC's end, because ultimately, like, if you have local athletes, or rather national athletes, who are going to be representing our country and they're going to be going abroad, I do think that like there's a certain way that you do need to carry yourself out. But the exclusion wasn't particularly because that, just because he got charged or like had received the defamation suit from Liu, right? But it was because of his conduct and his poor sportsmanship. So that's kind of like the main reason behind it. So what's going to happen if it becomes a situation where it's not the kind of dirty laundry that's between local athletes in Singapore, but rather it's made a regional, or in the future even worse, an international affair with like some other athletes. So I do think that it's totally fair though.
All right. Another thing to also note was that when he was charged with this 180,000, he actually crowdfunded for it. And then after he crowdfunded for it, when he paid the damages, he actually issued a statement to kind of like pressure Liu into perhaps giving away the money. So I think that was also kind of contributing the fact that, just now JH was saying about this idea of him kind of displaying like poor sportsmanship in that sense, or like poor behavior even after he had lost. But at the same time, I mean, he has also kind of like rationalized in some sense that, what he says is true. So this idea of truth, right, is somehow he believes that it's some sort of sportsmanship.
Yeah, I believe like from his perspective, and this part is a bit weird, right? Because the competition where I believe Liu was awarded the sportsmanship award was in 2015. And only 3 years later, Soh brought it up, right? So brought up this issue. Like 3 years later, then he decided to say, no, actually, he doesn't deserve the award. Actually, he did not even slow down. And according to himself, right? So who are the witnesses, right? Witnesses are Soh himself, his supporters, I would say, right? His
former coach, yeah.
So those are people on his side versus the others who are basically obviously on Liu's side. And even the state, I would say, which has ruled, was it the state, the courts, which has ruled that, who lost the case, right? It was Soh who lost the case, right? So obviously, based on that perspective, I would say that Soh is the one who's at fault for trying to stir something, right? And in my opinion, at this point, right, what is more important? Because he is actually a runner with considerable talent, right? And he has proven his talent, right? Soh has proven in the past that he can win medals in the region, right? The regional level, maybe even international level. But because of his, I would say, refusal to put this issue aside, even now, I don't believe he has fully moved past the issue, right? And that's why Singapore still has not allowed him to compete even in this year's SEA Games. There is that part where I feel like he really should just move on. Honestly, if he really prides himself to be someone who's able to win medals for the country, help us achieve greater heights, then at this point he should be moving on and be doing everything he can to achieve that. Right? Yeah.
So there are also, netizens who believe that when it comes to representing Singapore in sports, right, why does it matter if he had this defamation suit? What are your thoughts about it? Why not have athletes just purely go out to represent Singapore based on athletic talent? Why must it be the case where the character matters?
On the end, right? Okay, that was one thing I was thinking of after what Hazim mentioned as well. Because technically, if he had stopped at that point in time, by the time he received Liu's letter, everything would be A-okay. I don't think there'll be much issues in him continuing to represent Singapore, because it will probably be written off as something minor. So since he's already not able to kind of like control himself on that front, then I would say that from like the country's standpoint, like, wouldn't it be safer to not have such athletes represent the country? Because he might just go out there and then do some other like random things that might cause even more harm to not only himself but the country's reputation.
True. I think on that note about like if he were to do this even within Singapore, right, who's to say that when he goes out into the international platform and he's not happy about something? I think that's even more difficult to like rein in if there is like bad press as compared to like if it's locally,
so
right
damage
now.
control
the
is
damage
so
control.
limited. Just in Singapore, like it's probably just a defamation suit for $180,000 in damages. If it goes international and goes global, I think it's going to blow up even bigger than that. At this point, not even crowdfunding from his supporters will probably be able to resolve like all these sorts of issues that can just be easily mended with, I would say, it's not a small amount of money for sure, but like with money.
I think it's also in the name of fairness, right? So imagine if like Soh were to be let off that easily even after this whole situation. Then why not they also don't be on their best behavior and they can do whatever they want and still be able to represent Singapore just purely because they have the talent. Right? So I think it's also a note of fairness. The organisation has to send out to athletes in Singapore. So speaking about athletes, we also have other athletes as well that are perhaps more on the positive side. We have Joseph Schooling. One of the key things that happened was that he won the Rio Olympics, the butterfly event, right? Was it?
Yeah,
the butterfly swim event. And it was such a great honor for Singapore because he beat Michael Phelps and he got gold, right? But then after that, which is the more recent, the Tokyo Olympics, he didn't even qualify for the heats. Right, so he didn't do very well. And then we have the more recent SEA Games, which he participated in a few events. And I believe he did win quite a few events, but there was also one significant loss in a sense, or rather disqualification, for the 4x100 meter freestyle relay, where one of the team members, right, actually left the block early during like a changeover. Okay, so they were disqualified, which was really very sad because it ended like a streak for Singapore. I think Singapore had been winning that particular event since 2001.
Singapore's relay is quite strong.
Yeah. So it's like, in my opinion, I feel that, you know, when we talk about media coverage and media attention, right, for schooling, especially such a renowned athlete, right, it's really quite sad to see like after Rio, then Tokyo, and then SEA Games, you know, all these like losses. I think it's really very, it's a very privileged position to be where he is. But at the same time, it's also a very stressful position because you have to continue to keep up with that expectations.
But the thing is, he won his individual events, right?
For SEA Games.
For SEA Games, yeah.
Yes.
But the focus was on the team loss,
The loss,
the
yeah.
relay disqualification.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, so that's something to think about as well, right? About how we kind of focus on like either, schooling won big, everyone is like celebrating his goal, and then schooling lost, and then that's all they focus on. Like the media focus and the attention on netizens was on this disqualification.
Correct.
Yeah.
A lot of the attention was all just solely towards like, Singapore lost. Singapore lost. Singapore's streak was ended. They didn't really care much about like each athlete's individual wins. It's how the media chooses to portray it as well.
So on the note of schooling, Hazim, you have a little bit of a backstory.
Oh, okay.
Maybe you can share that.
An interesting tidbit because schooling went to ACS. Right, I went to ACS as well.
Woo.
And I would say a lot of the national swimmers actually also went to ACS. So I was classmates with Lionel Pu, Hua Zheng Wen, as well went to ACS, and JH, you had a senior as well, right?
I had a senior when I was in national service. He was one batch above mine, Zen Wei.
Yeah, I think he went to ACS as well.
Oh, he did? Oh,
yeah, so an interesting thing to consider about top national talent in terms of swimming, I think other sports as well, and them going to top schools in a way. In the first place, because we already know about the background of schooling, right? He has been interviewed, his dad has been interviewed as well, about the resources required to actually send schooling. I believe he left Singapore at a young age to be able to send him to the US. The amount of money and resources required is tremendous. And without help from the state, right, I believe. His dad did it all on his own to help his son achieve his dreams. And this is something else to consider as well about the other swimmers that congregate in certain schools in Singapore. And the idea of them having the opportunity to do so. Because developing talent is not easy and it's costly, right? So there is this idea that you need some amount of capital. If you want the best coaches, right? If you want to swim in clubs and if you want to compete with the top talent, right? For example, in Singapore, I believe like the top talent always congregate in schools like Raffles, ACS, Singapore Sports School as well, right? Because that's like a school dedicated to sporting. Other schools like SGI as well, right? So there is this interesting phenomenon, I would say, right? Quite interesting of like the idea of how come a lot of our top athletes also happen to go to top schools, right? There's also a recent article that blew up online. There's a recent top scorer as well. She's a female swimmer, I believe. Also another swimmer. Went to ACS and she's a perfect scorer. This article focused on her achievements, but a lot of netizens also brought up the fact that why are we so focused on all of these academic achievements on top of obviously her sporting excellence? There's something to consider here. The idea that the public feels like there's still a big focus on academics.
True. And also this idea here about like athletes being the role model. And in order for you to be like the role model, you have to be well-rounded. Because to them, performing well academically, right, actually sends a signal that you have self-discipline and you're of a certain intellect. So if you are just good at sports, it's not sufficient to be seen as a role model. You have to also be good in other aspects as well. So earlier on, people are asking the question, right, Soh is good at running, right? But why is it that he is not able to be part of the athletic lineup? In fact, he was excluded twice, right? For both SEA Games, this one and the previous one. So why not just like let him go and represent Singapore just because it's good, right? But at the same time, I think we can see some sort of a similarity or correlation in the fact that what the public or rather the media sees as a good athlete in Singapore is not only your ability to do well in that sport, but to also demonstrate particular characteristics.
Values.
Yeah. You must embody some sort of value in order to be a representative of Singapore.
On that note, it also felt to me as though like the focus on all these like academic achievements and capabilities, to the point where there were even certain articles that target audience of the article was clearly parents. Because I did come across one of the headlines was something like how to raise your child to be
yes.
like XX or like so on and so forth. So it's really nasty to see these sorts of because it does then reflect what we as society as well also then perceive as the most important when it comes to athletes. But in my opinion, I think the incident between Soh and Liu, on Soh's front, it's not just only about like, oh, what kinds of athletes we want to have, that we desire you to be a perfect scorer. In Soh's case, it just seems like he was really lacking a case of conduct and sportsmanship. In this instance also, it appears almost to be that like, apart from his own supporters, he wasn't getting a lot of kind of like help from anybody else. Like not even like the SNOC would
He had
start with him on this
sponsorships
front.
though.
He had sponsorships, but then ultimately, I'm sure behind the scenes there would have probably been some sponsorships that would have been pulled out because of this incident as well. Probably we wouldn't be able to know as well. But some people may also say that he would have brought some sort of publicity to different events as well, right? So I think there was one, he participated in the Pocari Sweat run, and then he started going on again on Facebook about his 7-minute timing, and then he issued like a challenge to kind of like individuals in Singapore, commando runners and like Gurkha runners to try to beat his timing.
Okay, so you're saying that like for Soh, it's more of the case of his lack of sportsmanship. But then when it comes to like younger athletes, it's this expectation to portray some sort of academic excellence plus athletic talent, right? So you're saying that they are kind of different lah. Yeah, I can definitely see that there's a difference. But in terms of media portrayal, right, there's this expectation that you cannot just look at athletic talent alone. Right? You have to look at other aspects as well.
Yeah, correct.
Definitely not an easy feat.
And even in light of Joseph Schooling's his loss at whether it was the SEA Games or whatnot, a lot of the media attention was focused on the loss.
So on that note about Schooling as well, I think he also mentioned in one of his interviews in SEA Games regarding national service, I believe he did say this SEA Games is actually like his last event, major sporting competition before he enters national service. So since we're on the topic of national service, which is a very controversial topic, but something that I'm not privy to, okay, right? Maybe we can have you guys to share a bit about like what do you think about these athletes in terms of them going for national service and all that.
So the question comes when like, are athletes who win glory for our country, would it already be considered national service, right? Personally, I would say yes. Okay, so if you were to tell me that like, in Singapore there are athletes who are able to obtain like deferment. In Schooling's case, he was actually, I believe, deferred for a number of years.
Correct. He was one of the few athletes given deferment because of his showing in Rio, I believe. Then he was given a deferment again for the next Olympics, which was in Japan. And then because he lost, that's when
he...
But like, if you consider, okay, so let's say Schooling took the gold as well in Tokyo, right? Then I feel like there's a higher chance than not that he would be granted deferment again to pursue sporting excellence.
I mean, perhaps. But on that note, right, I do think that it would still, like, having already so many like notable achievements would already be a good enough reason to take that as national service, because national service, as the term implies, is doing a service to your nation, and it's perfectly valid. Because after all, the years of a national service, okay, Hazim and I, we know, it will be the golden years of our youth.
Like
peak. We're at a peak, you know. And then we will be undergoing 2 years of national service ultimately, right? But whereas I would say that those 2 years of their age would be much more significant to athletes who definitely do need it. And it will be fair though. I don't see it as an issue where like, if I'm a Singaporean male and I see that there's this athlete that does perform well and like, he's able to get exemption because of these international awards and international competitions he joined, I don't foresee why it'll be an issue for me.
Yeah. To me as well. Like, I know there is this sentiment, right? Where people are saying, okay, so to me, it's more of the older generation who have served already, and then they feel like, okay, this NS is a rite of passage. No matter what, our young Singaporean men must go through NS. Like, they must, no matter what. Right? Sports, they don't care whether you're good at sports or whatever. You still have to basically serve your 2 years. And after that, you still have reservists, by the way, right? After your 2 years. Yeah, but I'm along the same lines as JH, right? My thinking is that For schooling, I feel like if ever the state would grant exemptions, he should already be granted an exemption because he's really brought home a goal. It doesn't matter about his showing in Tokyo, but the fact is that feat itself of achieving gold at an international level is something that's so rare, especially for a country like ours, right? And basically, most of us would never even step foot in that kind of arena, right? Much less clinch a medal. So yeah, I would say he's done enough for the country lah.
And yet there will still be online netizens who say I went through national service, so must you. It became like a cycle of a Sinkie pon Sinkie, right? So
What's that?
Sinkie pon Sinkie is basically this slang. Sinkie is referring to Singaporeans, right? So which is that we own one another, like whatever. Oh, you have something better than me, or because I went through something worse, you definitely can't get it as well. So if Hazim is working from home every day and I'm in the office every day and I'm feeling salty about it, so I'll say, complain to my boss. How come Hazim can... Oh, I complain, Eunice, how come Hazim can work from home every day but I cannot? So then, okay, never mind, everyone go back to office together.
So this shared resentment, right? Everybody must suffer together because I suffered. Okay, so are there any perhaps conditions as to why wouldn't you exempt an athlete? Because I mean, you talked about, for Joseph Schooling, he has done his part for Singapore, so therefore he should be exempted. Are there any instances where perhaps this rule doesn't apply? Maybe, you have seen this kind of situations, right?
Yeah, I think the deferment and exemption thing. So
deferment.
For Schooling, exemption, I would say he should be granted exemption from NSL. Totally. But the deferment first, I would say, that's the first hurdle they need to cross. And to cross that hurdle is quite difficult because, as you can see, recently, I think only Schooling and Zheng Wen, another swimmer, those are the two recent ones who've been granted deferment. There's another case in 2019, I believe. There's a footballer, I think quite a talented footballer, Ben Davis. He asked for deferment because he managed to sign a contract with an English Premier League football club.
I think he was joining the youth club, youth wing. Yep.
Correct, the youth wing. And to train in that club itself is quite prestigious. It's definitely very difficult to get into. And especially the EPL, right? It's not only in, I would say, UK, it's international. A lot of people all over the world vying to get into such clubs. But yet he wasn't granted a deferment. I would say it's quite difficult to determine who should be granted deferment or not, right? And this particular case itself, okay, something that's interesting, or I would say ironic maybe, because he wasn't granted this deferment, so he chose to default, not coming back to Singapore at all. And obviously the stance by Singapore is that because he's a defaulter, should he step foot, we know, right, the penalty for defaulting is quite severe. Probably have to pay the fine, $10,000,
Or even
right?
jail term.
And serve out a jail term. I believe Ben Davis is not ever going to step foot back in Singapore. So what happened in the recent SEA Games, actually, is that he was playing for Thailand. And he even scored a goal against us. So Thailand thrashed Singapore 5-0. And Ben Davis was one of the ones who scored a goal against us. This is quite ironic. So the body who decided...
How the tables have turned.
So
the turntables.
did they make a mistake, right? Letting go of such a talent?
I think this point of granting deferment, because even for individuals like Schooling and Zheng Wen, for them, it's a case-by-case basis, right? So that's how we've been always reviewing it. But I think one of the stunts on Ben Davis's issue was that he's attempting to join a club, but it's not really for national interests. It's for his own private affairs as well, right? Because ultimately the achievement that he will be joining an EPL club is his own. And yet at the same time, what individuals will also say is that but ultimately, do you know how tough it is to get into such a prestigious club, and let alone for Singaporean to be the one to do so? So from that standpoint as well, it does seem to be a very, very touchy issue. But at the same time, you can't blame the guy, right? I mean, he has such a great future ahead waiting for him to join an EPL club, and yet at the same time, he has to lose his citizenship just because there's this misalignment of interest here that, what you're doing is not for the country, it's for yourself. But,
Yeah, so imagine if he had the support of the country, he trained in the club and developed into a great football player, and he could come back and contribute, right, to Singapore. So that's, I would say, a loss lah.
Let's say if you're in the position of the authorities, will you defer? Like the letter comes to you Mr. Hazim, you decide.
I mean, to me, like, to develop top talent, I would just defer them. But it's easy for me to say, right? Yeah. But because my stance has always been like, if you're doing it somewhere down the line to serve the nation, right? To play for the country, be it swimming, football, badminton, whatever, right? You're serving the nation in one way or the other, right? And making an impact, I would say, in that way is not only prestigious, it's quite public, right? The impact, where everyone can feel it, can feel the pride. Like what happened in Rio. That's what got everyone together, right? Because of Joseph Schooling.
Everybody started swimming as well.
Yeah, and right.
I think there were TV dramas about swimming.
Yeah, because of that also, right, the attention on such sports. Yeah, and probably even like funding and everything increased for swimming.
Then it does seem as though like it does moves the needle a little bit from, rather than looking at what are some reasons that might get you deferment or exemption, shouldn't it be a case of what constitutes as national service? Right, like redefining the terms of like what is service to your nation, and in this case, is it international glory? Is it, being on the international stage and winning some medals for your country so that it pull the country together?
That's a good point. So how about other countries when it comes to this NS thing?
Actually, it's already been practiced in countries like South Korea. In the South Korean military, I mean, they have a hostile neighbor, so I would say conscription is a very important part of their national program as well, right? So for them, actually, military service is mandatory for adult South Korean men. They have latest until the age of 28 to enlist and then serve the nation. So actually in South Korea, they do have exemptions and deferments for their own athletes who do perform well on the international stage. But for them, in that case, it's actually a very precarious situation, also similar to Schooling's case, where the athletes need to constantly be able to win and to be able to win and to compete and to compete. Then until they hit the sweet spot age 28, then they'll be able to be completely exempted from military service.
28, I see.
28, because that's like they call it like the prime age for young men to be serving the nation. Okay, so on that front as well, that's kind of like the line that they need to cross.
But then, okay, so South Korea, right? When do they get enlisted?
Oh, I think similar to us, right?
Similar, is it? Because if that's the case, then the athletes have to really do very well for 10 years, right? 19, right? 19 to 28, so 9 years. Correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's really the case. So their way of it's the same for them. It's deferring until you get an exemption.
Yeah, but you defer for 9 years. If you're able to win consistently for 9 years, right? I really think that's a lot already.
Is it like the moment they win a medal, they are exempted, or?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question on that front there. But as far as I know, it was the case where there were certain mentions like, the moment they lost or the moment they are not able to keep up their performance, then it's conscription for you.
So there is a certain like benchmark.
Yes, there's a certain benchmark. And at the same time, who's the one to define that benchmark? And I don't think that's something we will be able to set as accurately as in Singapore. Because in South Korea, I think it also goes to the point of like joining major leagues, certain like competitions, certain contests. So not just only within the Olympics.
But I think 9 years is really a long time.
Yeah, it's a
I think, okay lah, let them lah. Okay, but then again, I didn't do it in NS, so people will just say like, well, you don't have much room to
but
comment.
I think I'll definitely be happy for people if they are able to defer and ultimately exempt from national service because you're just so good at whatever that you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, as someone who's gone through NS and has gone through the quote-unquote suffering of going through NS, I still feel like if you're so good that you're able to represent the country, win medals, then you deserve it. I don't
think it should ever be a matter of collective grief where you're like, then you'll be a Sinkie situation. I think it's kind of like unjustifiable in a sense as well, because for athletes, like, it's the prime years of their life and they will be at their peak performance during that age. Technically, that's also the reason why we go into national service only at that age, right? It's because that's kind of like the best stages of our life. Whether physically, but whether it's fully utilized in terms of our physical powers is something else to do, something else altogether.
Okay. Do you know that there are new sporting events added into the SEA Games? So one of them is chess, and there are also others as well, like esports. Okay, those are the new events added. So the question here would be, if you were to be able to participate in any of these events, right, what would you participate in?
Does it grant me a deferment?
No, I highly doubt so. Okay.
Events okay, I will definitely join esports.
Why is that so?
Because it's something that I'm very interested in, okay? Like something I do for leisure. But if you were to tell me that I'll be able to play it competitively on a regional stage, like if I'm that good, I think that I would definitely want to have a shot at it. It's still ultimately something I'm the most keen on. I'm the most interested in.
Okay.
So that's on my end.
Oh yeah, 5 sports. Okay, let me interject here. 5 sports you didn't know were at the SEA Games. So one of them is esports, which is League of Legends. And then I see the
League of Legends.
and then there's checkmate, which I think it's chess.
It's chess.
Yeah, and then there is waltzing. It's inside.
Specific kind of dancing.
Yes. And then we have handball. And then we have wrestling for women. So these are the ones that I got from this MCCY government website.
That's quite interesting. Like, because even at the Olympics, chess isn't being played as a Olympic sport.
They say, as a physically and mentally rigorous game, the International Olympic Committee recognizes chess as a sport. Olympics. International IOC. Yeah,
the committee actually recognizes it as a sport. But it's still not being played at the Olympics, I think.
Yet, probably. Interesting. I don't see how physically taxing though.
I think you sit there for long hours.
You have to sit there, like a chess match, especially at a high level, right? You have to sit there for a very, very long time. Yeah. And sometimes it doesn't even conclude. Yeah, it doesn't even conclude on the same day. Yeah, there's some, like, basically if you're at a stalemate, you have to like...
Yeah, so we sit there.
Sit there and wait. You sit there and wait. And they're thinking
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so esports for JH. How about you, Hazim?
I would say, of course, esports is the most interesting, right? For people, especially of our age, right? Playing a lot of games, that's the most interesting thing, I believe. But I mean, playing at that high level itself is another thing. Like the level of talent, reflexes, right? Especially for esports, is your reflexes, and also strategy. Being able to think on the spot to conquer your enemies. That kind of level of talent and skill required is still quite high. But playing games at an Olympic level still sure sounds fun, right?
Maybe it's just a case of right now, it's only available in the SEA Games, but maybe who knows down the line, there might be an instance where esports will be officially recognized at the Olympics itself. I mean, after all, the esports arena is also relatively young as compared to Olympics, which has like centuries of history. Yeah.
So once it's inside, then we can start to talk about deferment, right?
Maybe.
But you'll also be really tricky because you'll be deferring 5 people at one go.
For team esports, right?
That is if they are of the same age group, right? Yeah, but again, like it goes back to the default, right? You mentioned that if they are good enough to represent the country and they win, then they deserve to be deferred, what?
Yeah, correct. Then we should be fair. Right? We should be fair. Not true. So I mean, if they are able to win, then they can be accepted.
So that means that like the pool of esports athletes within the country will need to first have a trial by combat in order to determine who are the 5 or 7, depending on the +2 stand-ins who will make it to the Olympics. So you have one round first. So it's almost like a round of Hell's Kitchen to see who will be eliminated. Okay, I'm sorry, you're out. Okay, and then you have a few people, so going to NS.
Right, there's one that's very interesting though. This thing called fin swimming, I think. So basically it's where the swimmers wear fins to swim.
Like divers, right? Divers
but with
with
like
fins.
a huge one, not the flip flop one.
I think with a
There's
dorsal.
fin.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
so you do like dolphins.
Yeah.
I believe it's recent, right? So the Straits Times actually reported that this is something that they added into SEA Games as well. Very, very interesting. I think if it's me, I want to try this. Be one of those. Cool, can be a little mermaid. But competing with other little mermaids.
See, then you can be crowned Miss Little Mermaid.
Yeah, exactly. Self-crowned. Yeah, I think that's quite interesting actually. Yeah, so I'm very, very interested to see what are the new games that will constantly be added to like all these international sports. I think it's interesting to see how esports, something that we thought like, hey, why you keep playing game, never focus on your studies, can actually be like a fully fledged competition that there are people who spend years on honing that particular skill set. All right, thank you so much for listening and watching this podcast. We hope you enjoyed it.
Please like, subscribe, and remember to catch us on our next one. See you.
Bye.